What's the difference? Phonemes and graphemes. In this video series, I hope to clarify some terms we use in the field of reading. My goal is to show you how they may be the same or different and why knowing their definitions even matters as you teach your learners. First up, let's talk about phonemes and graphemes. Let's tackle the word phoneme first. The root of phoneme is phon or phone. And if you're familiar with this root based on other words you know, like telephone or symphony, you may remember that phone means sound. In other words, the phonemes are the individual sounds we hear in a word. Now, phonemes are the basis for phonemic awareness, which is our next video. For example, cat has 3 phonemes or 3 sounds. K, a, t. And sheep, although it has more letters, still has 3 phonemes. Sh, e, p. Now, can you tell how many phonemes are in frog? All right, if you guessed 4, you're correct. F, r, og. 4 phonemes or 4 sounds. Now that we understand that phonemes are sounds we hear in the words, let's move to the word grapheme. The root of grapheme is graph, and if you're familiar with this root based on other words you know, like photograph or paragraph, you'll know that graph means to write or to draw. So our graphemes are visual. In other words, graphemes are the actual letters themselves because letters are the visual or the written representations of the sounds we hear in the words. Now, graphemes can feel a little more complicated because graphemes can be a single letter like we see in the first column here, or a grapheme can be chunks of letters. Now, the key is that these chunks of letters still represent just one sound, one phoneme. For example, SH up there at the top represents the sound sh, one sound. CE in a word like face represents s, the one sound, and so on down the list. All right, let's look at some words. The word dog, for example, has 3 graphemes, D, O, and G. Whereas float has 4 graphemes. We have F, L, the OA goes together, and the T. And remember that OA makes one sound, O, so it's considered one grapheme. All right, let's let you try. Can you tell how many graphemes are in the word beach? If you guessed 3, you are correct. We have B, the EA is one grapheme, and the CH would be another grapheme. All right, now that we know that the phonemes are the sounds and the graphemes are the letters, let's talk about how to help our learners build the bridge between these two to become better readers. And by the way, they're going to become better spellers as well. Now, one activity I would recommend is called phoneme-grapheme mapping. That is a mouthful, but Catherine Grace wrote a book called Phonics and Spelling Through Phoneme-Grapheme Mapping. And in this book, she explains how this hands-on activity can strengthen the connection between the sounds learners know, which are the phonemes, and the letters that represent those sounds, and those would be the graphemes. And by the way, I do love how this activity helps to reinforce what we call the alphabetic principle, which is when our learners begin to understand how to apply their phoneme and grapheme knowledge to read and spell words. All right, I'm going to use one of my many mats from my seasonal mapping mats to show you how to do phoneme-grapheme mapping real quick. And if you want to grab a copy of these seasonal mats, I'll put a link in the description for you to my shop. I also have some free mats on the blog you can use and you can download and use anytime. Okay, so the first step in phoneme-grapheme mapping is going to be to call a word for your learners. So you're going to want to stick, though, with a phonics pattern your learners already know or one that you're currently working on. So in this example, we're using the word flake. So this means my learners should already be comfortable with blends because you have that FL blend at the beginning of flake. And they either should be working on the silent E pattern or this might be a quick review for them. So after you call the word flake, you're going to ask your learners to repeat the word out loud. And after they say the word, you're going to work with them to separate the sounds or the phonemes in the word. So it's going to end up being f, l, a, k. And then learners will drag one counter over for each sound, one for each phoneme that they hear. And once they pull them over, you're going to ask, how many sounds are in the word flake? That's right. There's 4 sounds in the word flake. And I would even have a student maybe repeat what those sounds are. Once learners have counted the sounds, they're then going to drag the counters down into the boxes below. All right. Now here's the next step. This is a good one. So one at a time, you're going to start with the first box or the first sound. So in our case, it would be the blue counter. You're going to work with your learners to move the counters one at a time out of the way to spell the entire word. Now, this is where those graphemes come in, those letters come in. So as you move the first counter, you're going to ask, what is the first sound you hear in the word flake? Yes, it's f. We're focusing on sound right now. And then we might ask, what letter do we use to represent that sound? Yes, it's an F. So let's move just the first counter out of the way and write the letter F. Now in the picture, you see all of them moved out of the way. That's what it would look like when you're finished with the entire word. But as you do each step, you're only going to move one counter out of the way at a time. And once the entire word has been spelled, like we have here, learners will use their phoneme-grapheme knowledge to read the entire word. And I would urge you not to skip this step. I can't tell you how many times I've had students who have spelled the word, counted the sounds in the word, and then read a completely different word. So you're going to want to connect it back to those graphemes, the sounds those graphemes make, and read that entire word. Now, this same activity is not just done once. You can repeat it with many other similar phonics words. You might use a word like snake next, or crate, or grape. So you're going to use different words to reinforce this. So I love that this activity is explicit, it's systematic, and it really does help to bridge the gap that sometimes occurs between knowledge of phonemes and knowledge of graphemes. And this really builds stronger readers and stronger spellers. Of course, and this process reinforces orthographic mapping, which we'll talk more about later in this video series. For now, you might also like to grab our mapping puzzles, which they're available to print or as a self-checking digital resource, and the link to it is in the description for you. Thank you for joining me at This Reading Mama, where you'll find hands-on learning for home or school.